This is the Outpost RBA podcast, where we lead security teams to higher ground and new perspectives needed to secure the frontiers of enterprise, with hosts Will Robus and Stuart McIntosh.
Hello, and welcome to the Outpost RBA podcast, where we help security leaders and practitioners get to higher ground and gain new perspectives for securing the frontiers of enterprise. We are your hosts. My name is Will Robus, and here with me is Stuart McIntosh. Stuart, how are you doing today?
Good. Chipping away.
Chipping away. There's no shortage of grinding in what we do on a daily and weekly basis. Is there?
Not at all. No.
All right. So in this episode today, we are going to unpack the title we chose for our podcast, which is Securing the Frontiers of Enterprise. Specifically, what do we mean by this? And why did we choose it as a central theme of what we'll be talking about today and in future episodes? But before we jump into our topic today, we wanted to mention a couple of ways you can get involved with other security professionals around the topic of threat detection and security alerting innovation. One way is to check out the RBA Community. You can get plugged in at the website rba.community. It's a growing group that we've been a part of, I think a little over a year now. And it started fairly strongly, probably 3 years ago. But in the last year, we got kind of some new champions and leaders, and I think we're up to over 700 people. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah.
and it's fun to see new people join every week because they literally come from all over the world. So the group is a mashup of RBA enthusiasts, security practitioners, in both large and small companies, as well as Splunkers and Splunk partners like ourselves. We host at least a couple of events every month. Some of the staples are a meetup to help people essentially get started with risk-based alerting, where we can connect you with other members of the group, typically hear success stories, as well as lessons learned stories from others that have worked to deploy RBA in their companies. And we can also get you plugged into the many resources available to accelerate your RBA journey. And those resources are also highlighted on the RBA.community website. The other event we run typically every month is called Office Hours, which is more of an open Q&A forum where you can bring your questions and get some guidance from some of the most seasoned experts in risk-based alerting and enterprise security. And of course, Stuart is definitely one of those experts, but that's another cool part of the RBA community. We have kind of the world's foremost practitioners and implementers of risk-based alerting. So it is the place to learn the cutting edge. Another great... So go ahead. Sorry.
I think almost every person who's given an RBA conf talk is a member now too. So that's what's also great is you may have seen recordings or have questions. It's a great place to connect directly with people who help write some of those talks.
Right. And there's a lot of app authors in there as well.
Yep.
Definitely. Another great way to connect with the group is by attending splunks.conf this year. It is in Las Vegas and starts on July 17th. We, of course, will be there and looking forward to actually hosting a real-life in-person meetup, probably on that Monday night, the 17th, right before Boss of the SOC, which is also another very, very cool activity to participate in, which we've done a couple times in the past. So, again, we'll Splunk.conf, that's in Las Vegas, the week of July 17th. Stay tuned for details. But in the meantime, make your plans, get approvals, register for .conf, and plan to be there in July.
Get those per diems.
Yeah, unlock those corporate travel budgets. Okay, so housekeeping's out of the way. So let's dive into what we wanted to talk about today. And that is when we talk about securing the frontiers of enterprise, what do we actually mean by that? And maybe the better question to start with is why is this so hard? So any kind of opening thoughts and reaction to this very broad topic in security?
It depends. Can we fill that answer in? It depends. No, I think it's easy to say it's hard. But explaining why it's hard seems to be where a lot of people struggle. I know I did for quite a while. I think one of the factors that makes it difficult is that it's essentially like building a house on the move. So every day you wake up and the house is supposed to be in a different place. It moved and you have to keep building. And so it's just always changing. And not only is what you're protecting changing, but how you protect it changes because the techniques that you used a few years ago maybe don't work. It's always shifting. And the other problem is that the what you're protecting seems to vary. So it's very context specific. So if we're a financial services organization, we want to make sure that any of the transfers, any of the money information, customer information is being protected, but it just keeps shifting. Where is that stored? How is that used? And you look at even 2020, where now how you access information is completely different. Now you have to be able to access it from a phone or from home or from a personal device. So when we say ever changing, yeah, the goalposts seem to move every day or two.
Yeah. And you hear a lot of CISOs and security practitioners and leaders talk about, your crown jewels, right? Like to find what's most important to you, protect it. But to your point, that's not always in the same place. And because the business is changing, right? The requirements are changing. We see a lot of, especially in the enterprise space, a lot of M&A activity. And, when you bring another company into your fold, or even, divest in a company, you get that IT environment that comes with it. It's a package deal. And then of course,
good, bad, and different, you get it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then of course, you mentioned 2020, and I think we saw that accelerate a lot of cloud migrations, and kind of reprioritize that, kind of going from on-prem to cloud accessible. And you can only go so fast as a large enterprise, and so adding new things is a lot easier and quicker than we can sort of shed the old ones. So the challenge of tech debt is absolutely present, and just adds to that sort of ever-changing.
And I think it's easy to like, we've heard the term tech debt, which like it's kind of pejorative, like, oh, that's just tech debt that you have to deal with or whatever. But it's also process debt. It's also data debt. And what I mean by that is, like, we saw this explosion of the use of a tool called Tableau for business analysis. So you take all this raw data, Tableau helps you make beautiful charts and ways of analyzing the data. But the way Tableau was sold was to business units. Like, hey, you don't have to hire those pesky IT people to do a report anymore. With our software, you can do it. Well, what happened is, in order to do that, you need data. And so there was a huge copying and pasting of this critical data now into a system completely outside of IT's control or loosely in their control. And meanwhile, all the old exports to Excel, they're still running. Like, all that old process is still running. So it's kind of this compounding effect of business seems to grow faster than it cleans up in the back.
Yeah.
Like, there's these pressures to move fast in the front, but in the back, there doesn't seem to be as much emphasis of speed or efficacy on the backside.
Yeah. So we've got a dynamic environment of what and where. So that's just the infrastructure. And then you have another dynamic of the actual users themselves and the processes that they're so that's constantly evolving and changing, and almost acts as a living environment, or a natural ecosystem kind of thing. And yeah, that's kind of a compound on top of literally the chips and the bits and the bytes.
And they have an influence on how these systems are used. You could have had a perfect idea for securing something, and all it takes is 30 seconds of an end user to find something. So in this one company I was working with, they were concerned about storing credit card numbers. And hey, there's only one place to store them, and that's it. Well, it was a pain for these people entering numbers and needing to reference them in the future. They found a date field on a form that wasn't required to be a date. So they started pasting credit card number strings in.
No.
And now all of a sudden, you have sensitive data in a place you didn't expect it, all because that form wasn't sanitized. But never underestimate the ability of a user to get their job done. They will find a way. And so again, it's another living factor here and with that example, one person found the trick and they told everyone in their region. And so then we had 200, 300 people doing the same trick all of a sudden. And that's how we spotted it. Like, how's this even getting in there?
Yeah. So all of a sudden you have an internal group of users that are essentially acting as hackers, hacking some data together. I mean, albeit for a genuine business purpose, but that doesn't change the riskiness and exposure of the actual data itself. So that's, and those are internal, quote unquote, hackers. And not to mention, I mean, the thing we hear about in the news and all the FOMO stuff is all about external attackers. And that's a third, even more challenging dynamic, because that you have no visibility or control over. And just maybe a couple of comments on how that constantly evolves from a security perspective.
It's gotten so for a while, what we used to do as a group was track when something was publicly announced, like a vulnerability or an exploit or something, versus when we would see it show up in a tool and then used against us. So those are kind of the markers that we would kind of do splits on timing. How long did it take? And maybe 5 years ago, that whole stream of events used to take about 7 days. From an announcement to us seeing attacks against us on our network was about a week. That now is hours. People have gotten so good at reversing either patches or vulnerabilities or splicing stuff together that they know that's public, and then creating and scaling those attacks across the internet. Like, that's the other problem, is that they use cloud too, because it helps them scale up their scanners. It helps them hide their IPs. It helps them change their persona. So in the same way, these great kind of SaaS solutions and cloud stacks have helped business transformation. It's absolutely helped the transformation with offensive capabilities or attacking capabilities. And it makes it really hard to keep up, because this is now a business. This makes money for other people to conduct recon, to conduct attacks. They'll sell just access, like, hey, here's credentials, or hey, we have something persistent in this company, and they'll sell it. They won't even do the attack. They'll just sell access. And so it's created an entire economy that is moving. It's financially motivated to succeed. It has access to the latest IT technologies for scale and speed and durability and efficiency. And it's against people who have to live in these environments where they're having to protect every single hole everywhere.
Yeah. So they've been able to scale their distribution, scale their effects, if you will. And then on the business side, they even are able to monetize some of these things, monetize the fruits of their labors or hacks, even in different ways and more effectively. They don't necessarily have to get to that breach state. They just have to
have any piece of value. So we came across the list of exposed credentials, and we were sharing that list with some other people who analyze breached account results. And what we found was a company took an original, so it was a threat actor actually took the LinkedIn hack or that breach, all those login credentials, and then they bounced it off the Spotify API to create a list of these are known premium Spotify creds and these are known free Spotify creds. And they packaged that list and they resold it. So It wasn't that there was a Spotify breach, but rather someone took previous breach data, bounced it off a different service, and sold it as valid. Like,
so essentially just
here's another set.
Farmed it up.
So it's like any incremental piece of value that they're trying to squeeze it out on that attack side as well, on that threat actor side.
Yeah.
And that's just cybercrime. Like that's just criminals being criminals.
Yeah, clever. So that's when we talk about securing the frontiers of enterprise. It is a gray, messy, ever-changing. It's difficult. And I think that's the sort of the first principles reason why cybersecurity is so difficult, and we see so many companies struggling to keep up, just keep up, let alone kind of on pace or even stay a bit ahead. So
I think it's also why it's easy from the stands to criticize security programs or defenders of these companies to say, well, why didn't you fix this? Or why didn't you have a strategy around this? Unless you're in it and you feel that wave of complexity and just how vast the amount of problems are, it's hard to understand what they're prioritizing. Like a lot of it's break fix, a lot of it is immediacy. And so it's easy to criticize, why didn't you have a 5-year plan for understanding container security risks? And it's like, I was just dealing with the fact that someone over here keeps stealing stuff from us. Like that, like I'm just trying to deal with the worst of the worst right now.
Yeah. The biggest imminent sort of threat or the biggest fire
that they think is existential to them, which maybe stepping back, it's not, but for them, it feels very much like it is.
Yeah. So not to belabor all the challenges and struggles, but we definitely wanted to start there and make a baseline, because at the end of the day, we're here to talk about, all right, how do we change this tide? How do we start winning? How do we come up with solutions? And so interesting, a quote, one of my favorite quotes that I like to bring up in challenging situations is from Albert Einstein, and he said, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. And I think that frames nicely sort of the approach that we've been employing, that we've seen success in other companies employing, and that's the risk-based alerting piece. It speaks to that, in that, you know, we've worked with a lot of companies, especially large enterprises, Fortune 500s, and we see what they have as far as strengths. And one of the strengths that we see is they have no shortage of tools and data and capability. Like there's cutting edge, leading edge solutions in kind of every security area, and we've never seen a team handicapped by, hey, we really need this basic tool set and we can't get it, so like we can only do so much. But that's really not the reality we see.
And here, people may disagree because they're in those programs and they've been told no. But what I mean is, when you step back and you look at the tools available in almost every place we walk into today compared to 3 years ago, 5 years ago, it's everything we asked for. It's just maybe it's not our preferred one. Or I also think that there's this tool chasing to solve a problem. But if you really step back and look at what you currently have, there's some very, very powerful feature sets available.
Yeah. And you've spent almost all of your career on that side of it, right? Working for a Fortune 100 insurance company. I mean, your job, your career was literally to secure the frontiers of that enterprise. And it's like I've known you for years, and I remember, back then when you were in the thick of it. And it was it was a horrible job. I mean, it was challenging. We're covering nights and weekends with the rest of the team. I mean, it was a always on, ready for the next kind of crisis, or at least like trying to prevent the next crisis. So, I mean, just kind of give us some commentary on that and what that experience was like. I mean, sorry, I'm bringing in the PTSD, but
yeah, a little bit,
but
a little bit.
Yeah, but I mean, in the context of what you had and what you weren't able to do despite of it.
It absolutely forged my desire for the space, for helping protect companies, because we were seeing things that I don't know how else you would protect an organization if you didn't have dedicated security people handling some of this work. You couldn't just send it over to the desktop team or the firewall team. We literally watched attacks shift to being very predictable, very understandable, to very highly dynamic, very bespoke to each company or end user for phishing. But on the other hand, I absolutely felt that this is not scalable. This is not, I mean, we did, in the beginning, it was 4 people covered everything 24/7. We do 2 weeks on and then 2 weeks off. And so for those 2 weeks, it was 60 to 80 hours a week handling alerts, at the time, the company decided to start working with offshore resources as well. So we literally became around the clock, because when people from India would log in to do work and trigger those alerts, it's 2 a.m. here. So it literally became around the work. So it helped us understand what we were dealing with, because we were up close and intimate with attacks and what was happening. And at the same hand, we saw that this wasn't going to change. We need, like, what everyone on the team agreed is it felt like we were losing, and that just became tired of this feeling of losing. We always felt behind, like, because we could just never get in front to try to prevent more things. So tired of being behind. And then ultimately at like the 6-month mark, it was tired of being tired, like just fatigued all around. And it leads to this anger and frustration. Like, why do we spend this money with security tools if they do nothing? Why do we allow these workers to continue working here if they violate security policy? Like, you just feel like the world's against you. And it kind of hit a tipping point where we said, enough's enough. We've got to change. We have to change our approach to this. It's just not going to work.
Right. And that was, you were behind in a constant state, and that, and then if you were getting all these, I mean, the offshoring is a great example of kind of one of those business things that change, and so forget the wild cards and forget the pivots, like just day-to-day operations. And I mean, even if you had more people, like that's the hardest thing to add from a talent standpoint and also from a budget standpoint. But I mean, if you doubled your people, did you see that changing at all or helping? Or
so we actually added a couple more shifts to that rotation, because the 2 on 2 off was just exhausting. So we added 2 more groups of people, 2 more pairs. And so it was 1 week on, 3 weeks off. So we went to that. And what we found is that transition between teams actually was extremely difficult. So like the handoffs of knowledge of what was gleaned that week to the new group never really worked well. And then on top of that, we started seeing personal approaches creeping in to how to handle alerts or what decisions to make. And so we realized that there's just not a mechanized way of scaling this, even from a human side. Like it didn't remove complexity. It actually introduced complexity by adding additional headcount to the problem. Because now there's training, there's expectation setting, there's performance discussions about what's going on. It actually complicates stuff.
Yeah. So the way you were doing it, it wasn't even worth trying to invest in that path because it wasn't going to be successful. In fact, it got maybe you had diminishing returns already with just a small amount of people. So yeah, and this is really kind of the genesis state of what created risk-based alerting. And it started with, you looked at it from a new approach and said, hey, this isn't going to work ever. So we need to change our thinking and figure out how to really make something that works or we're doomed. So talk a little bit about like how that played out.
We were doomed. Like that's the scary thing is we knew we wanted to try something different, and we were kind of charged by our manager, go make something that's better. I don't care, just disappear, come back in a week or two, and let's try something that's better. And so we looked at the market. We said, listen, if we have unlimited money, what's on the open market that we think approaches this problem differently? And we had some demos and we went through some stuff, and just everyone was missing the current state of alerts and SOC and handling attacks and stuff like that. Everyone was missing that. Everyone was coming at it from a security appliance standpoint and making a better appliance, but they ignored all processes that would actually happen in a SOC. So we said, okay, we're not going to be able to buy our way out of this problem, unfortunately. So we're going to have to invent something. And so we sat down. It was actually in the cafeteria. We sat down with some paper and started writing out, if I got an alert, what kind of alert would I want? And so we started with the finished product, which is what is worthy of a human's time for analyzing. Well, it would have these factors. I would know who the user was. I would know what type of role they have. What kind of access do they have? I would know all of the indicators, not just a single alert like, hey, Jimmy went out to a website that is known for pirated music. Like, I don't want a detection. I want, he did that, but before that, he clicked on a suspicious email link. Because now all of a sudden that context is maybe Jimmy didn't do that, but Jimmy's account did because it was taken over. Or, so we started with this, what does a true security alert look like that we want to work? And then we work backwards to say, well, how would we achieve this? And the big aha moment for us was this idea that you need to take detection output and essentially record it. So record it kind of like a Devo or a DVR, just recording everything and then analyze that set by who's Jimmy or Jimmy's machine. And what that does is that allows you to take things, because all these security vendors started making better, more verbose alerting too. So now all of a sudden the email tools started providing their own alerts, IDS, IPS. This is when EDR was really growing and expanding. All of these alerts, they're great, but they're better in concert with other alerts. And so that's kind of the genesis of where we said we need to aggregate, we need to truly correlate by user and system involved in order to find real threats happening in our environment.
Yeah.
And
so
then
go ahead.
and then from that we said, well, are all alerts equal? Is an alert from a call center rep the same as an alert from a domain admin? We said, no. Well, we know that as an analyst, but why? Why are they not? And the big question was, or the big realization was, not all user accounts have the same power to affect your environment. So a domain admin level account can affect changes globally, but that call center rep, they may only be able to edit stuff on their workstation in a couple of file shares, not nearly the same damage. And so now we started having this idea of priority or criticality. So whenever we saw a domain admin account, that's going to be more risk than this other average user account. And so we kind of smashed all of this together, this idea of multiple detections, this idea of context and environment awareness, that resulted in an alert that we personally would want to work.
Right. And that was based on, I mean, that what that done, or what that ideal alert looked like, was based on all of your experience in working previous alerts, because you were asking these questions and then having to track them down, whether through a portal or, maybe a little data feed or an internal search or something like that. But you knew when you saw something, even just an event, and we talk about going from 1-to-1 events to like many to one, right? But like you see one alert or one event and you're like, all right, that makes me ask a whole bunch of questions. And then you have to go down these rabbit holes to get these questions answered. And so what you said was, all right, I want to see all of that in one screen. So I can, it's all pieced together from a technology or from a data standpoint, but it's presented in a way that I can make a decision as quickly as possible, or ask one or two really pointed questions to get to that answer as quickly as possible.
So here, no, I mean, clearly we were a Splunk shop when we wrote this. And so what we started finding was there were two things happening for every traditional alert we were getting. One, we kicked off a series of Splunk searches against a bunch of data sources to get more details. And our first reaction to that was, why? That means the data is already in our SIM. Why are we having to manually do all this work and interpret those results? We should be feeding that in. That should be automatic. And then the second thing, it's cute that you said a portal or 10. Like it's for any analyst out there, everyone knows that you have that dreaded day where you have to reboot your browser and your 1,000 tabs that you've been using to work alerts for the week have to close, because all these different data sources provide a piece of the picture, like a piece of the puzzle, but no one's connecting puzzle pieces. And so that got really frustrating. And so that's where some of this enrichment or additional data feeds into Splunk started making a difference, because now we could show to leadership, here's why we want that in, because we have a great spot to hook it in here, make it all automatic, make it at machine speed, not human speed. Because what we believed was analysts, the role of an analyst is to decide if something's malicious or benign, and then to act accordingly. So if it is malicious, now how do we respond to it being malicious? Or if it's benign, how do we use that knowledge later on? Like, do we flag it in the notable? Do we add it to a list somewhere? But the point of it is that anything you do in order for an analyst to make that decision is kind of overhead. It's kind of processing overhead. Or what you need to do is present it in a way that makes them be able to make the best decisions with the least amount of effort.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. And you mentioned data being in different places, and that's a huge challenge that we didn't even mention in the early part. Is all these all these IT stacks are siloed and separate, right? But the users don't interact with them that way, right? So I mean, you're on an endpoint, you're on a computer, you go to the network to pull a file or pull some data, then you pop open a web browser and do some there, and there that's 3 IT stacks, and that's one of the reasons the traditional tooling falls short, is because you can only look at generally 1 or 2 of those things at a time. And so and that's really I think why this risk-based learning approach is so revolutionary, is because it doesn't, I mean, you didn't use anything new, right? You used your existing IT stack. You used, I mean, Splunk's a big piece of it, Splunk and enterprise security, but it was really taking this new thought approach, taking the tools and data you had at your disposal, and just bringing them together in a cohesive and strategic way, as you've been doing manually for as long as you've been practicing, alerting and analysis as an analyst and a security program.
Well, one of our first success projects after putting in RBA was actually this phishing response effort that we did. We saw phishing just absolutely explode, and specifically customized phishing. It wasn't the bulk FedEx or I love you stuff. It was these very targeted, personalized. They were using stuff off Facebook or LinkedIn to try to get you to click on it. So really, at the time, advanced phishing techniques. And because of RBA, we started noticing a relationship between our endpoint alerts and suspicious emails. And we were able to correlate them because of the user was involved in both, where as we started getting better at defending against phishing, so we started doing reputation blocking, we started defanging malicious URLs, so remove the hyperlink if you think it's suspicious. We started doing all these techniques, and we saw a direct correlation of the better we got there with our prevention, a direct impact on endpoint security alerts. And that relationship started kind of dissolving because we got so much better at preventing it from even hitting the computer.
Yeah.
So it's one of those where we were able to connect different silos of information and visibility into a unified view that we could actually present to leadership and say, hey, remember that investment of time that you gave us to learn how to configure our tools better? Here's the payoff. Here's the metrics.
So you essentially flipped the reality of being reactive, chasing malicious things after they sort of maybe kicked off, or the kill chain is kicked off, if you will, versus, hey, we're gonna get ahead of this and be more proactive and actually do work as defenders, as opposed to kind of the firefighter thing. So that's powerful.
And here's an interesting thing. That was 100% technical response to an issue. It wasn't improved user education about clicking or whatever. Now, here's what's funny. On the next quarter's phishing test results, the end users scored better. Why? There was no additional education. There was no, the deal was we evicted so much noisy suspect spam and just garbage that we made every user more sensitive to suspicious emails. So because we removed all that crap that they're used to just deleting, now it stands out when something comes into their email and it's like, well, that's not normal. And so it actually improved the end user's ability to suspect something. So there's these cascading effects when you really try to push stuff out or get ahead of it and start doing some prevention.
Yeah, absolutely. So that kicks off that, and we'll get into feedback loops and all those things later. But so let's wrap it up for today. So we talked about what the frontiers of security mean, how challenging it is to win as a defender or as someone charged with protecting those frontiers. and then got into a little bit of the RBA genesis. And that's really what we wanted to start with in these podcasts. And because I think it's an important differentiator, especially when you look at the broader cybersecurity marketplace. So RBA didn't come from a VC funded startup trying to reach unicorn status, or even some skunkworks brain trust of like uber smart ex-CIA analysts. It truly came from the unsexy trenches of defending a large enterprise in a very traditional slow moving industry. So and hopefully with some of these insights, you can start to see why it really is, risk-based learning truly is a revolutionary approach. And hopefully that's why you're here. And as us as professionals, Stuart and I, and us as Outpost Security as a company, that's what we're really dedicated to is let's turn the tables for every single enterprise and really be in the business of defending, as opposed to chasing fire. So we will dive deeper into RBA and innovations in defensive security in future episodes. So please subscribe to this podcast on your preferred platform. You can check out the RBA community we mentioned earlier at rba.community, as well as you can check us out at our website is outpost-security.com. That's outpost-security.com. If you want to get involved in our very active community Slack group, you can sign up at outpost.com as well, or outpostsecurity.com, which is, again, outpost-security.com/Slack. And of course, Stuart and I are on LinkedIn, so hit us up there if you'd like. But that's pretty much all we've got. So have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Outpost RBA podcast. Stuart McIntosh has over 20 years of experience building and maturing security programs inside Fortune 500 companies. In 2018, he gave a talk at Splunks.conf titled "Say Goodbye to Your Big Alert Pipeline and Say Hello to Your New Risk-Based Approach," which started the rise of RBA. As the creator and architect of risk-based alerting, he pioneers security methodologies at Outpost Security, which he co-founded with Will. Will Robus has spent the last 20 years in the operations or financial C-suites at technology and security companies, focused on what drives results and successful scaling. At Outpost Security, he works with CISOs to imagine a more expansive future for their SOC, once it has a solid RBA foundation. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Share it with your security team and CISO. Connect with us on LinkedIn and contact us at outpost-security.com to lift your team out of the fog of alert confusion with RBA 0 to 1.